The 1960s and 70s were a golden age for toys in America. Unlike today's super safe, car-seated, and bike-helmeted kids, we braved the dangers of toys with exposed heating elements. The ominous warning stamped on the toy, "Caution, contact with rivets or plastic parts may cause burns," is from a bygone era. Here's a closer look at the pieces which came with the Hot Wheels factory kit. A removal tool, metal base plates and wheels, clamps and molds, and of course the Plastix pellets. The pellets were heated and melted in the injector machine, then by pushing down on the handle, the oozing plastic was injected into the molds. When it comes to mass-produced plastic parts, toys companies used a process called injection molding. A two-part mold is held in a hydraulic press as molten thermoplastic is injected at high pressure. Mattel's 1970 Hot Wheels factory is a miniature version of this process with a plug-in heater and a hand-powered injector piston. You just slide open the heating chamber and insert a small plastic pellet called Plastix. Slip the mold under the nozzle and push down firmly on the lever to squirt a piston full of hot plastic into the mold, allowing you to make 10 different car bodies. Here are the 10 different cars that can be molded by the Hot Wheels factory. Today we're going to try molding the hot pipes in the center top row. This is the mold that will be used for the hot pipes. There's two different cars in here. The hot pipes is on the top, you can see the detail. You flip over the inside of the mold and notice the L. That stands for the long chassis. So we're going to get out the chassis mold next, and you can see the difference between the long chassis and the short chassis. It's just a little bit longer wheelbase. So once again, it's another two-piece mold, and it has a spot where you can put the wheels and axles into the mold and mold around it. This is an original Redline axle wheel set, capped wheels, that came with the kit. I don't have very many of these, so what I'm going to do is substitute a standard Hot Wheels 5-spoke modern wheel for the Redline wheel. They're the same overall length and size, but there is one difference that we'll have to take care of. On the inside of these wheels, there's kind of a round knob that's made to keep the wheel from rubbing fully against the chassis, where you don't have that on the old cap style. So you can see how the cap style fits in the mold. Now we'll put the 5-spoke in and take a look, and that little round knob hits in the opening recess, which that will prevent the mold from closing properly. So what we'll need to do is cut that knob off the wheel, make that slight modification, and then we can use standard 5-spoke wheels in the mold. So what I'm going to do is just get out my X-Acto knife and carefully rotate the wheel and slice the little plastic knob off the inside. Slide those to the center. Then I will take a pair of side cutters and just kind of nip the remaining piece off the axle. So once this is done, we'll run a test fit, make sure everything fits properly inside the mold, and then we'll be ready to assemble the mold and shoot some plastic in it. Now we'll take our chassis mold and put our modified wheels and axles into the long chassis opening, just to make sure everything fits properly. Looks pretty good. But before we can actually mold the chassis, we have to put a chassis weight into the mold. What this will do is it'll stiffen the chassis and also give it a little bit of extra weight so that the car is not too lightweight. It'll roll a little better and keep the chassis from flexing. So you put the weight in first, then put the axles in, and reassemble the mold. Make sure everything fits nice and tight. That looks pretty good. Now what we need to do is put a clamping band onto the mold. The mold has to be held together rather tightly when you're inserting the plastic. So this is just a simple band that latches on either side with some hooks. This is a Hot Wheels Plastix pellet. It was melted in the injector machine and then pressed into the mold. What we're going to use for this test is going to be a wax stick from the 2001 car factory. It's not really a thermoplastic, it's more of a waxy material. It's about the same size as the Plastix pellets, but I don't have many of the Plastix left, so we're going to cut a piece of the car factory wax and insert that into the injector machine. You have to let it wait about 5 minutes or so for it to become molten. And once the plastic, or in this case wax, is ready to go, we'll insert our base mold and push the ram down into the hole in the mold. Then once complete, we pull it out. A little bit of overflow, which is fine. That way you know that the mold is filled with the material. So we have to set that off to the side to cool. Once it's cooled down, we can remove the clamps and open up the mold. So sometimes the mold will stick a little bit, but in this case we didn't mold much, so it should pop right open. And turn this over and we'll be able to see the completed chassis. Now that I've taken the chassis out of the mold, you can take a look at it. You can see some slight discoloration, especially on the bottom where the two molding screws are shown. What that is the old plastic material that was still inside the mold. It's hard to clean that out, so it kind of mixes with whatever the next material color is. That's one of the drawbacks to this tool. So this tool came with the machine. We just clip off the two molding screws and the chassis is ready to go. So we'll give it a little test here, make sure it rolls fine. Everything looks pretty good. So now we'll go on to molding the car body. So basically the same procedure. We've got the hot pipes mold in place, clamps are on it. We've filled the machine back with more of the wax material, and we'll line everything and inject the wax into the mold. Then we'll remove the mold, and again have to let it cool down for a little bit just to let the body set up before we can open it up. There you can see that it overflowed slightly, meaning that we've got enough material in the mold. Now we'll remove the clamps and remove the body. So in this case I've already removed some of that excess material off of the mold before opening it up. So now both clamps are off. We can take the two mold halves apart and take a look at what we came up with. It's a little bit different thickness on the two mold halves on the body shape versus the chassis, and looks like came out okay. There's again a slight discoloration from mixing the two materials. You could always paint these bodies if you had to. Now to remove it from the mold, you have to press in through the molding holes and the overflow hole. You need to push on the body to get it out so that you don't crack or break it by trying to pry it off. Usually just by pushing, it'll pop the body right off the mold. Now we'll take a look a little bit closer. You can see it filled it pretty well. There's a little bit of flashing around the wheel well openings. We'll just use an X-Acto knife and kind of trim the flashing away from the openings and clean up the body a little bit. It filled pretty good. There's a little bit of an area above one of the rear wheels that didn't quite fill all the way, but for this test it turned out pretty well. So we've cut the molding sprues off of this, and now we will take the body and assemble it to the chassis. You can see there's two little bosses on the chassis that fit into the line with the holes in the molded body. So we just press these together. Sometimes if the bosses are a little bit too big, you might have to trim them slightly, but in this case, just testing everything out, it seems to go together just fine. So once we get everything pressed in place, we'll take a look and make sure it's aligned and give it a little test on the tabletop. And looks like the car rolls fine. I didn't put a windshield in this one as I don't have any clear material to mold, but it turned out okay for a first try on this tool. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.